Okay, so this is the beginning of the To Kill a Mockingbird screenplay. As you're reading, you'll see italicized words like this, which are stage directions. So those are not people talking, they are just saying what the setting is like or what the characters are supposed to be doing. And you'll also see that there's a character here named Jean Louise, who is the main narrator of the play, and she will be the same character as Scout. So it's the same person. Scout is just the child version of Jean Louise. So we'll start. Macomb, Alabama, at the start of day. It is just before dawn, and the half-light cotton farms, pine woods, the hills surrounding Macomb, and the courthouse square are seen. A young woman's voice is heard. And so this is the narration voiceover. Macomb was a tired old town, even in 1932 when I first knew it. Somehow it was hotter then. Men's stiff collars wilted by 9 in the morning. Ladies bathed before noon and after their 3 o'clock naps. And by nightfall, they were like soft tea cakes with frosting from sweating and sweet talcum. The day was 24 hours long, but it seemed longer. There's no hurry, for there's nowhere to go and nothing to buy, and no money to buy it with. Although Macomb County had recently been told that it had nothing to fear but fear itself. The Finch house and yard are seen. It is a small frame house, but high off the ground and with a porch in the manner of southern cottages of its day. The yard is a large one, filled with oaks, and has an air of mystery about it in the early morning light. That summer I was 6 years old, and now we go back in time to the 1930s, which is where the story takes place. Walter Cunningham, a thin, raw-boned farmer in his late 50s, comes into view. He is carrying a croaker sack full of nuts, hickory nuts. He passes under the oak tree at the side of the house. Scout, who is 6, dressed in blue jeans, drops from one of its branches to the ground. She brushes herself off and goes towards Mr. Cunningham. "Good morning, Mr. Cunningham." Cunningham says, "Morning, miss." Scout says, "My daddy's getting dressed. Would you like me to call him for you?" "No, miss, I don't care to bother." "Why, it's no bother, Mr. Cunningham. He'll be happy to see you." "Atticus! Atticus, here's Mr. Cunningham." Scout steps back to the porch as Atticus enters. Walter Cunningham seems ill at ease and embarrassed. Atticus says, "Good morning, Walter." "Good morning, Mr. Finch. I didn't want to bother you none. I brung you these hickory nuts as part of my entailment." "Well," Atticus says, "I thank you. The collards we ate last week were delicious." Cunningham gesturing and then turning to leave. "Well, good morning." And Atticus says, "Good morning, Walter." Atticus holds the sack of nuts. Scout is on the steps behind him. Scout leans on Atticus's shoulder as they watch Mr. Cunningham leave. "Scout, I think maybe next time Mr. Cunningham comes, you better not call me." "Well, I thought you'd want to thank him." And Atticus says, "Oh, I do. I think it embarrasses him to be thanked." Atticus turns and puts the sack on the porch and starts for the front yard to get the morning papers. Scout follows after him. "Well, why does he bring you all this stuff?" Atticus says, "He is paying me some legal work I did for him." "Well, why is he paying you like this?" And Atticus says, "That's the only way he can. He has no money." Atticus has come to the porch as Scout follows. He picks up the newspaper and reads. Scout says, "Is he poor?" "Yes." "Are we poor?" "We are indeed." Scout says, "Are we as poor as the Cunninghams?" "No, not exactly. The Cunninghams are country folks, farmers, and the crash hit them the hardest." Calpurnia, who is in her late 50s, appears at the screen door. And we'll find out that Calpurnia is one of the only African American characters that we'll see at the beginning of the story. And she is the maid of the family and almost like a mother figure. Calpurnia says, "Scout, call your brother." Scout says, "Atticus, Jem is up in the tree. He says he won't come down until you agree to play football for the Methodists." Atticus walks toward the tree. In a treehouse high up on the tree sits Jem. He is 10, with a serious, manly little face. Right now, he is scowling. Atticus says, "Jem, son, why don't you come down and have your breakfast? Calpurnia has a good one. Hot biscuits." "No, sir, not until you agree to play football for the Methodists," Jem says. Atticus is looking up at Jem. Scout is swinging in the tire swing. Atticus says, Oh no, son, I can't do that. I explained to you I'm too old to get out there. After all, I'm the only father you have. You wouldn't mind me to get out there and get my head knocked off, would you? Jem says, I ain't coming down. Suit yourself. Atticus turns and starts for the kitchen door as he reads the newspaper. Jem moves out from behind the covering and watches. Scout starts to go across the street and stops by the tree. Miss Marty Atkinson, a strong, warm-hearted woman, keenly interested in Atticus and the children, is working on her flowers in the yard across the street. Miss Marty says, Good morning. Scout says, Good morning, Miss Marty. Well, what's going on over there? Miss Marty says. I'm having a terrible time, Miss Marty. Jem is staying up in that tree until Atticus agrees to play football for the Methodists, and Atticus says he's too old. Jem says, Every time I want to do something, he's too old. He's too old for anything. Marty says he can do plenty of things. Atticus enters the yard from the house and walks over. You be good, children, and mind Cal. Good morning, Marty. Marty says, Good morning, Atticus. He won't let me have a gun, says Jem. He will only let me play touch football with me. He never tackle. Marty glances in Atticus' direction, then looks at Jem. He can make somebody's will so airtight you can't break it. You count your blessings and stop complaining, both of you. So we find out what Atticus' job is, because he is the person who makes other people's will, which means he's a lawyer. Atticus continues on out the yard. Miss Marty walks away. Scout climbs up into the tree. Scout says, Jem, he is pretty old. And Jem says, I can't help that. He swings down to the lower limb in disgust and looks down into Miss Stephanie Crawford's collar patch next door. A boy, Dill, is sitting among the collards. Sitting down, he is not much higher than the collards. He has a solemn, owlish face, a knowledge and imagination too old for his years. He looks up at Jem. Hey. Hey yourself, Jem says. Dill says, I'm Charles Baker Harris. I can read. You got anything needs reading, I can do it. Jem says, how old are you, 4.5? Dill says, nope, going on 7. Well, no wonder then. Scout's been reading since she was born, and don't start to school till next month. You look right puny for going on 7. Dill says, I'm little, but I'm old. Folks call me Dill. I'm from Meridian, Mississippi, and I'm spending 2 weeks next door with my Aunt Stephanie. My mama works for a photographer in Meridian. She entered my picture in the Beautiful Child contest and won $5. She gave the money to me, and I went to the picture show 20 times with it. Scout and Jem climb down to the treehouse. Scout climbs into the tire swing as Jem leans against the door facing Dill. Scout says, our mama's dead, but we got a daddy. Where's your daddy? Dill says, I haven't got one. Scout says, is he dead? No. Well, if he's not dead, you've got one, haven't you? Jem turns to Scout, says, hush. Jem motions to her with his head as Scout whispers, what's happened? What's up? Calpurnia enters with a shirt and starts to dress Scout. Dill, this is Calpurnia. Pleased to know you, Dill. Dill says, pleased to know you. My daddy owns the L&N Railroad. He's going to let me run the engine all the way to New Orleans. Is that so? Calpurnia says. Calpurnia exits. Jem turns away. Scout finishes putting on her shirt. Dill says, he says I can invite anybody. Shh! Mr. Radley, in his 70s, a regal, austere man, walks by. Scout and Jem see him and become very subdued, as if they were afraid. Their attention leaves Dill, and he senses this and looks at them to see what's happening. There goes the meanest man that ever took a breath of life. Well, why is he the meanest man? Dill asked. Well, for one thing, he has a boy named Dill that he keeps chained to a bed in that house over yonder. See, he lives over there. As they start to move out the yard, Scout follows behind them. They go down the sidewalk past Miss Stephanie's house, north to the Radley house. Boo only comes out at night when we're asleep and it's pitch dark. When you wake up at night, you can hear him. Once, I heard him scratching on our screen door, but he was gone by the time Atticus got there. And they're standing by the light pole now, staring at the Radley house and yard. The house is low, was once white with a deep front porch and green shutters, but darkened long ago to the color of the slate gray yard around it. Rain-spotted shingles droop over the eaves of the veranda. Oak trees kept the sun away. The remains of a picket fence drunkenly guard the front yard, a swept yard that is never swept, where Johnson grass and rabbit tobacco grow in abundance. Dill's eyes have widened. He's becoming truly intrigued. So we see the Rowdies are the scary neighbors that everyone's afraid of, that tell all these crazy stories that are not really true. And we see that Dill is a very curious young man with a big imagination. Dill says, "Wonder what he does in there." Scott says, "I wonder what he looks like." Jem, "Well, judging from his tracks, he's about 6.5 feet tall. He eats raw squirrels and all the cats he can catch. There's a long, jagged scar running all the way across his face. His teeth are yellow and rotten. His eyes are popped, and he drools most of the time." Dill says, "Oh, I don't believe you." Miss Stephanie, who's Dill's aunt, comes up behind him. She is in her late 50s, a spinster and the neighborhood gossip. She comes up without their hearing her. She has a habit of half shouting when she talks. Stephanie says, "Dill, what are you doing here?" "My lord, Aunt Stephanie, you almost gave me a heart attack." Stephanie says, "Dill, I don't want you playing around that house over there. There's a maniac living there, and he's dangerous." "See," Jem says, "I was just trying to warn him about Boo, and he wouldn't believe me." "Well, you just better believe him, Mr. Dill Harris." Jem says, "Tell about the time Boo tried to kill his papa." "Well," Stephanie says, "I was standing in my yard one day when his mama come out yelling, 'He's killing us all.' Turned out that Boo was sitting in the living room, cutting up the paper for his scrapbook. And when his daddy come by, he just reached over with his scissors, stabbed him in the leg, pulled them out, and were right on cutting the paper." Dill's eyes are popping with excitement. They wanted to send him to an asylum, but his daddy said no Radley was going to any asylum. So they locked him up in the basement of the courthouse till he nearly died of the damp. And his daddy brought him home. And there he is to this day, sent out over there with his scissors. Lord knows what he's doing or thinking. Later on that day, Jem is swinging in the tire swing. In the distance, the town clock is heard to strike 5. "Come on, Scout, it's 5 o'clock. And they jump from the swinging tire and start to run out to the yard. Dill says, "Where are you going?" Scout says, "It's time to meet Atticus," and she runs after Jem. Dill follows her, and they run down the street. Dill says, "Why do you call your daddy Atticus?" "'Cause Jem does." "Well, why does he?" "I don't know. He just started when he began talking." They run up the street toward town. Jem slows down. Mr. Bose is on her porch. "Listen, no matter what she says to you, don't answer her back. There's a Confederate pistol in her lap under her shawl, and she'll kill you quick as look at you. Come on." They walk cautiously on and start to pass the DeBose house. It is an old and run-down house. It has steep front steps and a dog-trot hall. Miss Henry Lafayette DeBose sits on the front porch in her wheelchair. Beside her is a Negro girl, Jessie, who takes care of her. "Hey, Miss DeBose," Scout says. Miss DeBose, snarling at the children, says, "Don't you say hey to me, you ugly girl. You say good afternoon to me. You come over here when I'm talking to you." Scout, Jem, and Dill keep on going. They are made very uncomfortable by her. They see Atticus coming, and they run toward him. "Atticus, this is Dill. He's Miss Stephanie's nephew." Atticus says, "How do you do, Dill?" Mr. Bose says again, "Listen to me when I'm talking to you. Don't your daddy teach you to respect old people? You come back here, Jean Louise Finch." Atticus takes the children and walks over to her porch. "Good afternoon, Mr. Bose. My, you look like a picture this afternoon." The children are trying to hide behind Atticus. They begin to giggle nervously at each other. They're all very scared of Mr. Bose. Scout says, "He don't say a picture or what?" Atticus turns to look at the yard. "My goodness gracious, look at your flowers. Did you ever see anything more beautiful? Mr. Bose, the gardens of Bellingrath have nothing to compare with your flowers." "Oh," Mr. Bose says, "I don't think they're as nice as last year." "Oh, I can't agree with you," says Atticus. Jem says, "He gets her interested in something nice, and she forgets to be mean." The three children are standing behind Atticus. Atticus hits Jem with his hat. I think your yard is going to be the showplace of the town, says Atticus. Well, grand seeing you, Mr. Bowes. And he puts on his hat and they start on. Scout's room at night. So we're jumping ahead a little bit to nighttime. She is undressed and in bed. Atticus is seated on the bed. Scout is reading to him from Robinson Crusoe. I had 2 cats, which I brought ashore on my first raft, and a dog. He holds the book to her face and looks at Atticus. Scout says, Atticus, do you think Boo Radley ever comes and looks at my window at night? Jem says he does. This afternoon when we were over by their house. Atticus interrupts. Scout, I told you and Jem to leave those poor people alone. I want you to stay away from their house and stop tormenting them. Scout says, yes, sir. Atticus looks at his pocket watch. Well, I think that's all the reading for tonight, honey. It's getting late. She closes the book, and he sits up and takes the book and puts it on the table. Scout says, what time is it? 8:30. May I see your watch? Scout asks. He gives it to her. She opens the case and reads the inscription. To Atticus, my beloved husband. Atticus, Jem says this watch is going to belong to him someday. Atticus says, that's right. Scout asks, why? Well, it's customary for the boy to have his father's watch. What are you going to give me? I don't know. Well, I don't know that. I have much of value that belongs to me, Atticus says. But there's a pearl necklace, and there's a ring that belonged to your mother, and I put them away, and they're to be yours. So we can see that Atticus is a widower. His wife died. Scout stretches her arms and smiles. Atticus kisses her cheek. He takes his watch and gets up. He covers her and puts out the lamp. Good night, Scout. Scout says good night. Good night, Jem. Jem says good night as well, and Atticus goes out. In Jem's room, he pulls the cover over himself in the darkness. Scout lies in bed thinking. Jem? Yes? How old was I when Mama died? Jem says you were 2. And how old were you? 6. Old as I am now. Uh-huh. Was Mama pretty? Uh-huh. On the front porch, Atticus is sitting there and he can hear the children's conversation. Was Mama nice? Uh-huh. Did you love her? Yes. Did I love her? Scout asked. Yes. Do you miss her? Uh-huh. There is silence. Atticus listens to the night sounds. Judge Taylor, who is 75, comes up on the porch. Judge says, evening, Atticus. Atticus says, evening, Judge. The judge walks over to him and pulls up a chair as he starts to sit. Rather warm, isn't it? Yes, indeed, Judge says. How's Miss Taylor? She's fine. Fine, thank you. Atticus, have you heard about Tom Robinson? Yes, sir. Well, the grand jury will get around to charging him tomorrow. I was thinking about appointing you to take the case, though I realize you're very busy these days with your practice, and your children need a great deal of your time. Atticus says, yes, sir. I'll take the case. Judge says, I'll send a boy for you tomorrow when his hearing comes up. Well, I'll see you tomorrow, Atticus. Atticus says, yes, sir, and thank you. Yes, sir. Judge Taylor leaves again. There is silence. Atticus rocks and listens to the night sounds.